Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of Camp Chat with Cam. Today we're just going to briefly go over 4 books that really helped me get my legs underneath me in the area of primitive skills, and they really helped to hone my understanding of nature. So, that being said, let's go to book number 1. This is sort of where it all started for me. And it's a book by Gene George called My Side of the Mountain. There's the cover of the issue that I have. And just briefly, the main character of this book is a kid who was about my age when I first read it, that basically formed a life for himself in the outdoors on, you might have guessed by the title, a side of a mountain. He had a pet hawk or falcon, I can't quite remember. It's been years since I read this book. He built himself a house and just built a little homestead by himself out in the wilderness. And I really contribute my initial desire to learn more about self-sufficiency and primitive skills to this book right here. It really got me interested. Because like I said, the character was about my age, and it put some crazy ideas in my head, trust me. So, when I first read that book, for years afterwards, all I wanted to do was buy books about primitive skills. And that's all I asked for Christmas for like 3 or 4 years straight. So, the next book that I got that was really influential and really formed, I guess, my philosophy about nature and primitive skills and these ancestral skills is a book by Thomas J. Elpel called Participating in Nature. Now, this book has a bit of a weird format. There is tons and tons and tons of information in here, and it's good information. And there's pictures and all that good stuff, but there's also narrative applications of the skills this book teaches peppered throughout. And there's some pieces of narration in here that don't have anything to do with the particular skill. It's just Thomas talking about an experience he had in nature or expounding on a philosophical idea around primitive skills and the importance of maintaining the ancestral skills. And I see it as a very formative book. One of the first projects I ever did, if you can see right there on the cover, was make a burnt out wooden like mortar and pestle with charcoal in my breath, and that was really fun, and I learned how to do that from this book. So that's book number 2. Book number 3, and unfortunately this is a 2-part series, and I have lost the first edition. I think I was out camping somewhere and left it in the rain, but it definitely got too wet to read and it got trashed. But this is issue number 2, well, part number 2 of a 2-part series called Naked into the Wilderness. Now, the first book is the more meat and potatoes of how do you do all this stuff. How do you brain tan a deer hide? How do you start a fire using a hand drill, bow drill, several different ways. That has a whole chapter devoted to fire. How to build these shelters. How to find water. How to find food. And it's just, like I said, the meat and potatoes of how do you do these things. Naked into the Wilderness, part 1 covers that. Now, Naked into the Wilderness 2 talks more about how you apply those skills you learned in 1 in real life scenarios. So they have, let me just open to the contents here. I was reading a bit in this last night because it's been years since I read this too. So they have a chapter basically on nutrition. They have chapter 4, a more advanced primitive skills technique of building a dugout canoe, which isn't in the first book. That's all about building traps and making bows and atlatls and things like that. Chapter 5 is just a hodgepodge of different things like flint knapping, making a bone needle, building a quickie bow, and then it starts to get special for me. This is why this book is special. Chapter 6 is a collection of articles that they wrote for a magazine called Wilderness Way, and they're great, and it talks a lot about why it's important to maintain these ancestral ways in today's society, which is funny because this was written in the 80s, but it's still just as valid today. Chapters 7 through 9 are my favorite part of this book, and that's because they took upon themselves a 3-day challenge to literally, well, not literally, almost literally go naked into the wilderness. They went with nothing but the clothes on their backs, and they survived for 3 days. Not only survived, but thrived. And this is a narrative kind of a narrative description of exactly what they did and how they did it, in which order, why it was important, things they wish they would have done differently, and yeah, it's a very interesting read. And those 3 chapters come with photographs and narrations as well. And then the last chapter, which is also kind of special, is an excerpt from a novel that Jerry McPherson wrote, and it's kind of to bait you into buying the full thing. It's a great little short story. I guess I should mention the author of this book is John and Jerry McPherson, if you can see there. But I would suggest don't just go out and buy this book. You need part 1 first, or buy them together. I mean, this is a perfectly good standalone book, and maybe if you do have kind of a platform to build from with primitive skills, then this will make perfect sense to you. But if you're new, I would definitely recommend do part 1 before you do part 2. But definitely, eventually, some point in your life, you got to read both of them. The last book I want to talk about that was formative in my current understanding of primitive skills and nature is a book called Shelters, Shacks, and Shanties by D.C. Beard. And as you can see, this book has seen much better days. Doesn't even have a back cover anymore. It's because this has gone with me into the woods untold amounts of time. Untold. This is the one book. If I didn't bring any other books, this book went with me from the time I was probably, I want to say I got this book when I was 13 or 14, and it went on every excursion, every day trip, every 2-hour trip with me for years. But this book explains how to build shelters on every scale and at every level of complication that you could ever imagine. Let me find an example. So here we're building a log cabin on top of stakes in the ground. That's, a little advanced. Is it handy to learn about? Sure it is. But let me find something here. We start out with just classic wiki-ups. So this book was instrumental in forming my knowledge of how to build a shelter anywhere out of anything, and it's definitely worth a read. So pick it up, guys. Pick up all these books if you're looking for a new read. If you haven't read them before, support these authors. And I just encourage you to branch out and expand your horizons, expand your knowledge any way possible. With the internet these days, it's easy to just stay on there and you can learn anything on there. But to me, there's something about a physical book. And I'm so far out in the woods right now that I have no internet. So what do I turn to? Paper books. So go out, get some. I hope you appreciate my recommendations, and I will talk to you the next time. Bye-bye.